Hi everyone, this is Christina Barr and you're watching Black Tea News. Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Barr. You're watching Black Tea News. Today, we're going to be talking about how the Biden administration is preparing to roll out vaccines for children aged 5 to 11. And there's a lot of people who have a lot of different opinions on vaccines, but I will say this, the fear that we have stoked inside the hearts and the minds of people, especially if you have them directed towards children of that age, is irrational. So we're going to be talking about that. And it's not when I talk about mandates and vaccines and so on, it's not necessarily because I'm trying to pitch that they're unsafe, though. People do need to make risk assessments as whether you want to take it or choose to not to take it or whatever. That's on you. But there's so many people who don't believe in making any sort of rational sort of assessment about how we're going to live and if we can go back to some sort of normal. So it's important to talk about those things, especially the administration going forward and what they plan to do. But there are people fighting back, and it's just kind of like this title of this episode is Who's Going to Blink First? And we've seen some corporations really pushing vaccine mandates, and now they have to relent. We've seen Biden say that government employees are going to have it, and then there's unions pushing back on it. So the question is, are we going to have enough people sort of stand up and say, no, enough is enough. We can make our own decisions. We accept the risk, we assume the risk, and we're going to continue pushing our society forward. So we're going to be talking about that. Netflix the CEO walked back his defense of Dave Chappell. People were very upset because he made some trans jokes. So there was a walkout today. We're going to be talking about that and a couple other things. But before we get to it, I do want to thank Brighter Michigan PAC for allowing me to use their studio. As always, they do not care what I say in the regards of, they don't care if I trigger you, and I don't care particularly if I trigger you. And there's no one to complain to. It doesn't work like that. I'm simply using the space. That is the relationship. So if you don't like it, you're just going to have to keep scrolling on. But I do appreciate Brighter Michigan PAC allowing me to use this space and work out of this studio. So I do want to encourage you to go to blacktnews.com, check out different content that I have on the website. Of course, I have great shirts on the site that you can check out. It's amazing. There were all these nice things in the economy, and now they're gone. We're just in such a really bad place with inflation. I was at the gas station the other night, and I was just, pumping something, and they thought that they heard someone else was with me next to the pump and at the other pump, and they thought they heard a scream, and I was like, what? And they're like, oh no, I just thought I heard a scream. And they're like, it's Halloween, it's getting scary. I'm like, no, well, nothing's scarier than the inflation. They're like, oh my gosh. So I mean, I would assume this is more of a red area it was a more red area where I was, so I could assume her politics, but people know that prices are going up regardless of if you are blue, team red, team independent. That the prices are going up because you have eyes and pocketbooks. So yeah, we had all these nice things, low gas prices and so on, back in the days of Trump, but those things are gone now. People thought it was more important not to have mean tweets, I guess. So we have that shirt if you guys want to just reminisce. That's available on blacktnews.com. Of course, we have the Denounce White Supremacy shirt, and we also have the goat hoodie. The goat hoodie, I have it out. You can get it in a normal shirt, and I do have it in different colors. It's so comfy, and you want to stay warm, which I wish I had it right now because it's so cold. in the studio right now. It's so cold, and I'm not usually too cold, but I'm cold right now. So I wish I was warm. I should have brought my hoodie. We also got the "I am not the victim you're looking for," which, oh my gosh, guys, I in a battle for my life on my TikTok earlier today. Not a battle for my life. I mean, obviously it's an exaggeration, but um, people don't like when Black conservatives talk about things. Someone I did a video reply to someone the other day, last night, and then they did a reply to me. I was critiquing, that flag where it says, um, science is real, love is love, Black Lives Matter, and no person is illegal, and kindness is everything, or something. So she came off up on my page because someone else had did a video saying you can't be Catholic and pro choice. And so she mocked that person, saying, feed the hungry, take care, love your neighbor, and all this other stuff. Like conservatives need to do these things. And I was just like, Christians do these things, conservatives do these things. So it was kind of a really bogus point, a bogus video. And someone replied and said, we do these things. So this woman made a video with a bunch of just different headlines saying that Republicans don't care about people, conservatives don't care about people because of things like, because we won't fund all their social programs, because we won't get the vaccine, and just if we don't bow to their whims, then they assume we are not compassionate. And we've had this conversation many times on the show before. So, and then she brought up that people have a F Biden flag or whatever, or F your feelings, I think. And she's like, this is your unofficial slogan. And I'm like, I think the unofficial slogan is really still make America great again, or keep America great, or whatever, until something else pops up. It's, not bleep your feelings. Ben Shapiro's saying is facts don't care about your feelings, but whatever. And so she's like, if you come to our neighborhoods, you're going to see this sign. So the sign was love is love, and so on. So since it all started with abortion, I took every single saying on that flag and I related it to abortion. Like, you say Black Lives Matter, but you support systemically racist institutions like Planned Parenthood. No person is illegal, but immigration, obviously you can immigrate over here illegally, but it seems weird that you're so pressed about people who are breaking our border laws, but you're at the same time you're willing to deport a child out of existence. I talked about love is love, but if you don't actually relate that to anything, it's just a slogan. And love requires responsibility and sometimes self-sacrifice. Um, and when I first started with science, is if science is real, then you've accepted the biological reality that life starts at conception. And so anyway, she did a reply video to me late last night, and so she has a bigger account than me, so I was flooded with like the dumbest trolls. And there are people who are making like typical sort of abortion emotional arguments, but really a lot of them were just dumb, basic sort of things that people say all the time. My body, my choice, but there's another body. You're forcing me to do it. I'm like, how? Like I said, specifically explain how I'm doing it. And then someone was like, we're not letting them get the abortion. I'm like, that's not force. And then they get mad if I don't reply to them all. And I'm like, I have so many notifications. Um, so anyway, but there's people calling me Uncle Tom's and stuff like that. So that's how I got off track a bit. People were calling me Uncle Tom and all kinds of other different things because I said that life starts at conception, and that killing babies is bad. That's my position. It doesn't scale based off of circumstances or anything like that. Someone said I had 0 life experiences. I'm 32, by the way, so that's a really bold statement. But they said I have no life experiences, and I'm just talking out of my rear end. So I did a video reply to that lady, but I said, regardless of whatever life circumstances I have or they have, whatever, the value of a child doesn't scale at all. So That's what it's like on the app. But I do have my fun on the app. I do have my fun on the app. So I'm sorry to get off track, but just wanted to rant a little bit. It was like taking up a lot of my morning and more than my night than it probably should have. I'm gonna have to just block people more liberally, I suppose. First funny thing I want to show, or not the first, but the funny thing. So we talked a little bit about Mayor Pete and his maternity leave, and he is, the Secretary of Transportation, and we have a big crisis right now with ships not being able to dock, and so there's all this chaos around, and they're just like, oh, everything for you. So that's again coming from my buddy G Prime 85. He does great comics. I love his comic book art. So it was funny to see everybody's reaction to people on the Daily Wire who are all dads talking about they were mad because they were saying that men taking maternity leave or needing to take as much time isn't really the same as women needing to take maternity leave, and they're like, you're the party of family values. And so and they're like, yes, but we are still saying that men and women are different, and babies need mothers in a way that men can't supply, um obviously, especially if you're breastfeeding and so on. And in normal circumstances, Mayor Pete, he has not been on the job for 12 months. And to get the sort of benefits where you can get paid leave like that as a federal employee, you're supposed to be on the job for 12 months. So if this was one of his subordinates, they probably wouldn't have got the same benefits that he got. Now, I'm not saying I really think Pete Buttigieg would have made all the difference in the world about the supply chain if he were there, because I don't. Because I think a lot of these people are incompetent enough, and I don't think he was qualified to do the job. But it is what it is. It's kind of a funny story. Speaking of supply chain issues, Jen Psaki was just so unsympathetic the other day when she was asked a question about different chains. And this is probably going to make a nice soundbite in 2022.
Just a question on the timing on the supply chain issue.
Yeah.
Actions that the president has taken. It was clear in March of 2020 when COVID hit that the supply chains across the world had been disrupted. Even as the sort of work to fight back against COVID proceeded, it was crystal clear that things were not improving on supply chain. People couldn't get dishwashers and furniture and treadmills delivered on time, not to mention all sorts of other things. So why is
the tragedy of the treadmill that's delayed?
Right, probably.
The tragedy of the treadmill. People can't get on the tragedy. Well, people make those things. People buy those things. That's still someone's business. Though that may be something that they find trivial. That's still someone's business. That's still someone's livelihood. That's still someone's product that they're buying into. And the fact that they can't get what they need, whether it's as a consumer or whether it's someone who is selling it, it's just not something to mock. And that's one of the reasons that particular attitude when you have people who were like picking winners and losers during this pandemic, like you're essential, you're not essential. It just is it good to give that sort of power to the government to delegate who gets to survive and who's not going to survive, especially when all this is pretty much in their making, including like funding the lab in Wuhan, but they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about that. There's articles today talking about the harm of the pandemic and how it's had a big mental impact on children, and they frame it as the impact due to the pandemic rather than the precautions that we've taken as a society that have actually hurt people. And I've talked about this before. I had a dear friend of mine who passed away last year, not from COVID. They died of cancer, and it was a bit of a shock. I didn't expect for it to happen. Their family kept pretty tight lip. But it was a shock, and it was such a shock. I don't remember mourning for someone that way. So I can't even imagine the pain from the actual family members. But I mean, I've known this person like my whole life. And so anyway, she left behind a husband and two little girls. And just to think of the fact that they still had to be isolated and couldn't really see their friends going through this whole entire crisis, it just made me sick to my stomach. And they were troopers, and we would FaceTime and call and talk about Pokemon and other kinds of things. And now I believe they're able to like interact and stuff. But then they were saying that at the time when I was talking to them first about this, when I realized what was going on, and they weren't really being able to see friends and other stuff because of the pandemic, and they had like virtual classes, but they couldn't talk to their friends because of the nature of the virtual classroom. And then they were saying, well, we don't know if we're gonna have to go back in person because they didn't know about the vaccine and so on. So um and and that was I guess earlier in the year, if not late last year. I want to say maybe it was earlier this year when we had those sort of, I guess it was earlier this year when we had that conversation. But I was just so upset. And I feel like so many things that we did to make the cure, like President Trump said, we have to make sure that the cure isn't worse than the disease. And I don't know, a lot of people probably mocked him or thought that was silly at the time, but he was right. There's a lot of things that Trump doesn't say in the most elegant sort of way. There's a lot of things that I'm like, from time to time, but some things he's dead right about. And this was one thing that he was right at 100% right about. And as soon as they said 15 days to close the spread, to slow the spread, people were going to take advantage of that and shut down the country for as much power that they could possibly rip from us, because that's just how the government is, until the people decide to push back. Until the people decide to push back. But even at the point when Trump was trying to give people their power back, there are people pushing back against him. Like Trump said, he did an executive order and he said, your churches are essential. And Hezekiah Walker, he did a very popular song, every praise is to our God. So maybe you've heard that song. It's very, very popular. But anyway, he said that he did a post, and it said, I'm not opening up my church until the White House opens up for visits. First of all, why would you, man of God, dictate that your church isn't going to open up until to the White House, just some federal property or whatever, decides that they're going to open up for visits? That is really strange. That is really strange, especially if you think, because having White House visits like that is going to be, if you're going to talk about what's essential, not essential, that should be super low on the scale of what people decide is essential. And so they might have decided to just hold that off for a long time, versus your church, which you should be giving proper sort of spiritual, essential nourishment to your congregation. And then there's, of course, people in congregations that actually do hands-on sort of works for people and charities and so on. So just the fact that he could dictate that's when he was going to decide to open up his church was crazy. But the kicker, guys, the kicker is that during the George Floyd memorial, he was there singing his song. He was there singing the song. So he couldn't open up his church. Okay. And he said he wouldn't open up his church until the White House decided to open up for visitors. But Hezekiah Walker could go sing, projecting his spit everywhere, in the COVID era, to sing every praise at the George Floyd memorial. Mind you, that funeral that I talked about of my friend that I went to, and granted, people had funerals that were way more restrictive than what I had to like go to. But I think maybe it was like 50 people there. We had to be masked. I was the only person like in our like singing sort of group at church that they decided that I would be elected to go because they thought that maybe I would be the one who would be most likely to be able to finish the song without crying. But other family couldn't go. My mom was the first lady. I don't think she went. It was very restrictive because of the numbers. But you think about these big social justice funerals that we had, like for George Floyd and so on, and of multiple ones, by the way. But we just live in a world that was totally bonkers and totally unfair through this whole thing. And it's crazy to me that so many people still played along for so long. But now there are people who are frustrated, really frustrated. So the Biden administration has announced now that they are gearing up toward pushing vaccines or maybe obviously it's going to be pushing vaccines, but they're gearing up to give vaccines to children 5 to 11. Children 5 to 11. And there was an interesting tweet um, that was covering a post from the CDC director that even after the FDA approves of it, which they're probably going to approve it. So I wouldn't hold my breath if you're crossing your fingers, hoping that they won't. They're probably going to. That there's still plan to wear masks in the winter months. So I was reading the comments surrounding this tweet, and do you know what people were saying? Especially people who were already like, even people who were vaccinated or not against their children getting vaccinated. They said, I'm not vaccinating my kids if they have to wear masks. That doesn't make any sense. He said, and so many people relented because that they made a pitch like, hey, get vaccinated. Well, Biden said, we just need 100 days of masking. We just need 100 days of masking. Obviously, that wasn't true. They had, they're still wearing masks in some parts. Places have mandates. Your leaders might be not wearing the mask, but you got to wear the mask. And if you're a business, enforce the mask. So the 100 days of masking wasn't a thing. It's what they promised, what they said, but still pushing it hard. They said they wouldn't do mandates. They said they couldn't do mandates. And now we are at the point where obviously we have mandates and they're pushing them very, very hard. Bill de Blasio, I got a video prepped of him, pretty tyrannical, which you guys aren't surprised, right? Here's Bill de Blasio of New York talking about how you don't deserve to be paid if you're not vaccinated.
It's a mandate now for all city agencies, all city workers. It's time for everyone to get vaccinated. Our public employees are going to lead us out of the COVID era. Look, what we did with our schools worked. Our schools are incredibly safe, and families needed to know their kids would be safe. Well, we all need to know we're going to be safe going forward. We got to end the COVID era. We did the vaccinate or test option, but it hasn't gotten us where we need to go. So we say vaccinate. If you choose not to, you have the right to go on unpaid leave. We're going to work with your union to figure out what happens next. But the bottom line is we're not going to pay people unless they're vaccinated. They don't lose their jobs. They can correct and come back. I think that's compassionate. I think that's right. But the bottom line is 96% of our education employees did it. 96% of our healthcare workers did it. It's time for everyone else.
So it's compassionate that if you lose your job and if you then relent to our oppression, that we will invite you back into the fold and then brag about all of our numbers about how we got 96%, 98, and whatever vaccinated. Okay, that's not compassionate, not in the least bit. And did you notice how he said we tried to just have the weekly testing option, but that wasn't getting us to where we needed. So So Biden and them, they said you would either have to get the vaccine or you'd have to do weekly testing. Oh, geez, I've hit a button. So they said you'd either have to do weekly testing, or you'd have to get the vaccine. And people were still going to be like, no, I'm not going to get the vaccine. But those tests, they're not fun. Like, they go up in your brain. People talking about they touch your brain stem. I watched my sister get one, and the nurse was like, "Oh, it's not a big deal," and she's just swirling, and my sister's like, twitching as she's going up into her nose, and she's like, "Oh, no," and I've heard stories about kids that have had to have it, and so now they're like willing to wear the mask and do whatever they have to not have to have that test again. So, but besides the fact that the test is uncomfortable, there's companies that have decided that they're not going to pay for the test. So, Blue Cross Blue Shield, for example, they are like, you got to get vaccinated, and then they were saying that if you you can have the test, but you got to pay for it. They're like, we're not paying for it, but they are moving to everybody get it. So there's people who are saying that you have to pay for your own test. So it's always about twisting people's arms to get them to comply, which obviously was the goal, because it didn't make any sense. Because if you can still catch COVID and spread COVID after you have been vaccinated, it doesn't make sense to not just vaccinate everyone. I mean, not vaccinate everyone, but have everyone do the weekly testing. It doesn't make any sense. So he said having that option wasn't good enough. So either you comply or you're going to lose your job, and you can work with your union. You're not going to be paid. You don't deserve to be paid if you don't do what we say. And if you relent, you can come back and have your job. That's compassionate. New York is a crazy place. Is a crazy place. For sure. For sure. So what's crazy to me is that people are pressing so hard about the vaccine, and there's some people who are really scared for their kids. One time I was on TikTok one time, and there was some super pro vaccine pushing person who claimed they were a pediatrician. I mean, who knows? But they were on TikToks, and someone in the comments said, "I'm so scared for my 4-year-old. I'm thinking about putting them in a clinical trial." And I replied to them, I'm like, please don't do that. That's really bonkers. Like, there's no reason to have that sort of fear. It's an irrational fear if you're at that place. If you're really so scared about your kids, if you're concerned about people spreading it to people who are elderly, like, well, first of all, it is an eventuality that people aren't going to make it. Like, one day we will all die. But the vaccine has been readily available. And if you are someone who has comorbidities, some kind of immune deficiency, respiratory disease, or if you are up there in age, you can consider getting that. And I know plenty of people who are elderly who's like, I'll take my risk. And that's their risk to take. But if you are a parent and you are so concerned about your children, that's just not a rational fear. So I've shared this before on social media, but I don't know if I've shared this doing a show before. But here's like annual deaths among children in the United States, for 1 to 4 and to 4 to 15, and we see that drowning is higher, vehicle accidents, homicide, cancer, cardiovascular disease, the flu, suffocation, and then COVID comes at the bottom of those deaths. And then when it goes to 5 to 14, they do shift around a little bit. Cancer is up higher, but COVID is second from the bottom, just above suffocation. Just above suffocation. You are more likely to, get into a car crash and have your child die than them catching COVID and dying. So you can take what you will of that, make what you will of it. But you just need to know that it doesn't make any sense to have an irrational fear. And my issue, and I've talked about this a lot, and I guess who wouldn't? It's COVID's swept up the nation for the past, 2 years, I guess. I'm not trying to make the case that these vaccines are so unsafe. There are risks. Is it likely? I guess it depends on your medical history, but it depends on your medical history whether you're going to die of COVID in most cases. And I guess on all cases, in your age and your medical history. Your age is the biggest determining factor, for sure. But children who have passed from COVID, who've had no sort of underlying conditions, there's barely any deaths in that case at all. So if they start pushing that we really, 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 really need to vaccinate kids for their particular personal safety, and you have parents pushing and screaming who will try to make this happen, it's just not a rational fear. It's just not. And you have to ask yourself, is it worth the risk? And make that decision as a parent. But if you're just freaking out your kids because you've been fed a spoonful of media lies every day, get some perspective, get a grip. Get a grip. This is not a rational fear. Not for your children. Not for your children. Maybe for your unvaccinated 85-year-old grandmother, yes, but not for your 5-year-old. Not for your 5-year-old. And on top of all that, director of the CDC is still saying, even if you vaccinate your kids, we're still gonna wear masks. So I did see people pushing back and saying, I will not inject my child with this if you're telling me they are still going to have to go to school in masks. So NPR did a interview with a school teacher and some of her kids, and they were talking about the mask. And so I want to play some of their reactions. It's funny because the teacher was unaware that some of her students disliked it. Like, oh, you guys don't complain. Well, they know that they have to do it. And so it was a surprise to her. So I'm going to just play through maybe all of it, but at least through some of it. So this is an NPR interview.
We've heard a lot of debate about masks in schools from grown-ups. The debate has gotten pretty contentious and at times pretty ugly, but we haven't really heard a lot from the actual students. Elementary school teacher Katie Wright in Montana decided to ask her class of 6 to 9-year-olds how they felt. NPR producer Lauren Magaki has this postcard.
So class, I would just like to know, how do you feel about wearing masks? Do you know why we wear them? Do you know how they work? Raise your hand so we can just have one person at a time.
It makes me feel cool because it makes me feel like I'm in a different dimension with no breathing.
It makes me feel like I'm in a different dimension with no breathing. Oh, it's so an imagination there. Wait, what a way to make a adventure out of a bad situation, kiddo. What a way. Gosh. I feel like I'm in another dimension with no breathing. These kids can't breathe. Now, some of them are going to say that they can or whatever, and they don't mind it that much, or they've gotten used to it. But there's definitely kids in here who say that they can't breathe. And that fella had a creative answer about not being able to breathe, but that was interesting.
Basically, it just feels like COVID's happening.
For me, it feels sort of hard to breathe sometimes, but I know it's protecting us from Delta COVID, so I kind of roll with it. It suffocates me, but I still wear it.
What I don't like about wearing masks is that I have a pair of glasses. They do get fogged up, and so I can see the fog.
She's absolutely right. I could not find my glasses for like the longest time. So at one point I did find them, and I had a mask on. I was like, oh my gosh, it was, so that little girl's so right. The struggle is real.
I don't really like masks because sometimes they can make you itch. Also, if you don't have the right size, it can make your ears hurt. I know it protects you because it's supposed so you don't get sick. I don't want to get my parents sick or any of my brothers. Right now, I don't get COVID, but I like wearing masks. My mom and my grandma both had COVID, so I just know that it's very bad for me to get. That's why I made my mask. My mask feels good, but when I wear it, COVID doesn't get in.
That is like not a very scientific opinion, by the way. Most of the Biden administration already like admitted, like people went on the shows and admitted the masks that we're wearing, which mostly are the cloth masks, do not work. Don't offer very much protection. Fauci was saying masks don't work at first, and like 2 years ago, he had an interview talking about infectious diseases and what if something happened. They're like, should we wear masks? He's like, no, that was all silly talk. But the cloth masks do not work. I mean, if they're going to promote masks, they could just tell everyone at least get the N95s, right? Even like the surgical masks that people wear, those are supposed to be like done in like sterile environments where they take them off like periodically. Not people have stuff on and wear them like all day. And if you even look at the box when you buy them, it'll says that it doesn't protect you from COVID either. So this little kid's been fed false information.
Masks kind of suck because they kind of don't let you breathe that much fresh air in. My dad doesn't believe in COVID, so he doesn't wear masks.
I love how kids just like tattle. I love how kids just tattle.
I don't like masks because they make it so you can't see the faces when you smile at each other. But going to school, I think I would wear a mask the whole day if I got to go to school.
He said you'd wear a mask all day if he got to go to school. So most of them realize this is a reality that they have to live in. But I do want to mention that little child that said that they don't like the mask because you can't see other people smile. And I'm a really introverted person myself. But it is weird going places and not being able to see people smile. One time I was walking in the grocery store and I walked by someone and he's just like a friendly, hello, I acknowledge you, kind of have a good day kind of smile. And then as I started to walk by, I just turn around to the woman. I'm like, I'm sorry if it looked like I just glared at you. Because all she can see are like my eyes from up here, and now they got like remarkably smaller and stuff. And she's like, "Oh, she didn't really notice," but I'm just like, we are missing something from our general interaction with each other, not being able to see each other's faces, and I wonder how much of an impact I know that has on kids. Because I mean, I'm not a super warm and fuzzy sort of person, but it's something that I've noticed. And when I was at Motor City Comic Con, they did make everybody wear masks, so I wore a mask, and it was definitely strange not being able to see people's smiles and so on. And it didn't really seem like people were very concerned. Like people just, to me, my observation was people understood that that's just what we had to do. But did people have like a fear of that sort of gathering? It didn't seem like that to me. And when I was like sitting down like in the green room eating like lunch, I was I started talking to somebody else and they're like, I'm so glad they didn't cancel it, but I wish we didn't have to wear masks. I think it's stupid. And so I agree with I agree with them. But I understand that the convention is just covering their butt. Now there's another convention that's happening like Halloween weekend that's like an anime convention, and they said that to participate in certain like interactions with the guests that you have to show proof of vaccination, which people were upset about that because they just like announced it, by the way. So you either have to be vaccinated, fully vaccinated, or you have to have proof of a negative COVID test. And so some people are like, this is barely any time to get that COVID test. I wish you would have said something earlier, or they would have just flat out not gone. They wish that they were doing earlier. And people were like, some people were replying to the people who were complaining, and they said, well, why aren't you vaccinated? Why aren't you vaccinated? But there was one comment that was like golden. I thought about leaving this comment myself, but someone else was did the duty, did the due diligence. So they were mocking Youmacon, at least it seemed like they were mocking them, saying, well, why don't you have everyone testing? Because you can still spread COVID even though you're vaccinated. So why shouldn't everyone have to prove that that they are carrying the disease? And they said, because you're doing this, me and my family will not be attending. And so there is a couple of likes and stuff, but someone commented under that comment, and they said, have you noticed that people aren't replying to this? Okay, because how can you? They made perfect sense. They made perfect sense. Absolutely perfect sense.
Cool. I wear my mask so much I just forget it's on after a while, but it does make your face kind of hot.
I have to say I'm really impressed. I didn't really know how much you guys didn't like wearing them, because you don't complain. You guys just wear them. So thank you for sharing how you feel about it, and thank you for doing it even though you feel that way about it.
I didn't know you guys hated it. There's been people who have, and I guess they get it, but they're, sometimes there are people who will be gaslighting on TV and be like, my kids don't dislike masks. And obviously some of them do. Maybe some of them think it's fine. And even the kid at the very beginning who said he couldn't breathe was like, I like it because it's like I'm in another dimension where there's no air. Kids are weird. Kids are funny. Kids say the darndest things, but that doesn't mean that they can breathe. And obviously some of them were like, it's hot. I can't breathe. It feels like I'm suffocating the whole time. And the teacher's like, well, oh, wow. I didn't know that you felt like that. So thanks for not complaining. I'm going to show no concern for the fact that you can't breathe, though. Ugh. So my hope would be that they change that policy around, and that the teacher has concern for our students. Like, hey, some of the students are saying that they can't breathe, that they are suffocating, that those are their words, not their parents. We like ask them directly, and that's how they feel. And if they do something they don't or whatever, but people pretending like kids just love to wear the mask. Maybe they like wearing a fun sort of mask and stuff, but it's not fun. I did not like wearing the mask over the weekend at all. It did get hot too quick. It wasn't it's not very breathable, but I mean it could have been worse, I guess, but I didn't like it. And I can't imagine people have to wear that all day long and like retail. And there's been people who've had to go to the dermatologist because their skin is all messed up from the friction of the mask and all kinds of other things. So there's other effects of wearing the mask besides not even being able to breathe. Because my sister had to go to her dermatologist, and they said that a lot of people are going to see the dermatologist because of the masks irritating their face so much. But there you have it. Kids don't like masks. Teachers are surprised, like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that you couldn't breathe. I showed you guys that COVID is very, very low as far as risk to these kids. But Biden they're going to make it so that as soon as the FDA approves it, they're going to roll out that they have like 28 million doses ready for kids to take the vaccine, ready, rip and roaring to go. And there's going to be people who get their kids vaccinated. But I do have a concern that they're forcing people to get it for their employment. So are they going to be forcing you to get it and mandate it that your kids can't go to school unless they have the vaccine? Because that's what they're doing with young adults in college. Man, I saw a video the other day of someone who got unenrolled from online school. They paid for their classes, and then they were like, oh, well, you're not, you got to supply the stuff that you're vaccinated. And they're like, I don't interact with people. What do you mean? Why do I have to prove that? Because they're tyrants. It doesn't have anything to do with science. If this was driven by science, there'd be plenty of people still don't like it. But they could accept it. They could accept it to some degree. or you'd have less people pushing back. But the fact that you have people who push mask mandates, and then you have leaders who don't follow them, they say don't travel, and then people like by Governor Gretchen Whitmer will go down to Florida, whatever. You have Gavin Newsom will go to the French Laundry, hanging out, not wearing the mask, and so on. Biden the other day was in a restaurant and he didn't have his mask the whole time, and Peter Doocy was talking to Jen Psaki. He was like, well, he didn't have his mask on, and she's like, well, that was only when they were exiting or something, and then he had it in hand. He was like, no, it would happen more than what you're saying. Like you're gaslighting people. Obviously, you guys don't think that it's just something you guys are doing for show and power for whatever reason. For whatever reason. But I guess probably because the Democrats think that that's what people want. And they're showing that they're trying to care about the vaccine. There's so many people who are like, Trump didn't care. And he got all these people killed because he was denying the vaccine because he called it a hoax. That's not even true. He didn't call it a hoax. He didn't call it a hoax at all. The reaction, he said it was like the new hoax where the Democrats want to just go after him, which was true. Which was true. Another ding. President Trump was right. Look at that. But he didn't call it a vax. I mean, he didn't call it a hoax. People were mad. Well, he should have been wearing masks. He was tested all the time. You can't spread it if you don't have it. He was tested all the time. So if people just like thought just a little bit critically, just because he didn't go around looking like a fool like Biden most of the time, obviously making a show, people think that he didn't care. With the ripping and roaring economy that we had under Trump, people kept expecting it to fall and to go bad, and they were waiting and waiting and waiting, and the dip did not happen. They were probably crapping their pants. I know they were. Figuratively, anyway. And then they said, we got to shut down the economy. We got to shut down everything. 15 days is supposed to break because millions of people are going to die. And then they said the best case scenario was like 300,000 or something like that. If you do everything right, and maybe that number was higher. And so he was like, okay. You think he would do that if he wasn't taking it seriously? Get out of here. All the way out. All the way out. Get out of here. So people are pushing back. Southwest had a lot of cancellations. They were trying to say that it wasn't organized. Or unions were saying it wasn't an organized thing. They were trying to blame it on the weather, but the weather is nice and sunny and so on. But then some other airlines started to have lots of flights that they had to shut down. Delta didn't really have problems because they didn't have the mandates like everyone else did. So Southwest has now backed off. But you do have authoritative government that is expecting businesses to keep pushing these mandates. In-N-Out Burger, which is a big place on the west side of the country. I think I've maybe had some before. But in San Francisco, they announced that they're not going to be checking to make sure that the customers are vaccinated. So then the city shut them down for a little bit. And their position is that this is their statement, we refuse to become the vaccination police for any government. We fiercely disagree with any government dictate that forces a private company to discriminate against customers who choose to patronize their business. This is a clear government overreach, and they're absolutely correct. And you know what? We saw time and time again, especially I can speak from experience from my state in Michigan, that they relied when it was clear that the governor couldn't get all the local sheriffs and so on so much in the pocket to do whatever they wanted to enforce their tyrannical mandates, that they had to turn to the businesses and say that they pull their licenses or whatever if they didn't enforce these policies. So these businesses that we tried so hard to help during the pandemic when their doors were closed, calling, to have pickup and so on, just trying to make sure that they can survive through the whole thing. Then they had to turn around and say, you got to wear your mask if you're going to come in here. And I didn't really want to comply. And I had people who were like, I will never comply. They were so like tough about it. But man, I saw the fear in their eyes and they're just like, we just don't want to get shut down again. And I was like, okay. And I even did a status like, we got to give these guys a break a bit. But they do have to come together at some point and say, you know what, we're not going to keep being the enforcers, and we're not going to do government's job here. You have to do your own job, but we're not going to do that job for you. But they made sure to constantly make this pandemic about you versus you versus you versus you, and it is not us versus them. They want to make it so that you confront your neighbor who's not wearing a mask. They want to make it so that you're mad at the person who's unvaccinated, and vice versa. It's not about Lori Lightfoot who said you have to wear a mask and then doesn't do it or go gets a haircut or whatever. It's not about those people. They're too busy trying to set you up to fight this person and that person, then saying, hey, we need to sue the government. we need to come together and have some kind of class action lawsuit or something. So people need to come together and say enough is enough. Businesses need to say we're not going to enforce these policies. The government has to do its own dirty work. There needs to be enough employees that say, hey, we're willing to walk out if we have to, or we're going to strike and so on. And whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, you should stand next to someone else to just say, hey, the government is going too far. You may believe, even if you're 100% sold in, bought in, you've got the vaccine, you're going to vax up your kids, everything. Don't let the government just take so much of our freedom. We need people to stand up against this. And we can stand up against this. Southwest seemed like they were pretty adamant. And then they were embarrassed. And they're like, it's the weather. It wasn't the weather. And now they walked back. And now we have police officers are being laid off in different places in Chicago and in Seattle and other places because you have officers who won't get vaccinated. So streets are becoming less safe because talk about they not caring about safety, the safety of the public. Would you be more concerned about like when you call the police that they're vaccinated? Would you care that if you're getting robbed that they come and they help you? Because I want the police to be there when I call, and I want exactly if people say like we have too many police or whatever, I want exactly the amount necessary that if I call they're within 5 minutes or less. That's how many police I want on my streets. I want to make sure that I have access. That's what I want. But they're willing to let some of these people go. And it's pretty extraordinary. It's pretty darn extraordinary how far they're willing to go to just absolutely leave the country in ruins. And for what? For what? So there are people who are seeking religious exemptions, and there's people who've spoken out and said they're not going to get them. In New York, you had the governor who's like, there's no good reasons and so on. So there's actually a really good leak today. And I've heard from sources and stuff that the Biden White House is freaking out because the leak is so good. But the DOJ was talking about religious exemptions. And they don't believe that people have them sincerely, or they're talking about having to fight back against them, even though people don't hold them sincerely. But people do hold sincerely religious beliefs and do not want to get the vaccine for religious reasons, especially if they're related to fetal tissue with abortion. And that's something that they really pressed against to deny any sort of connection. But here's a little bit of that leak.
Listen to what this DOJ lawyer had to say about religious exemptions when it comes to the issue of abortion.
Cases. And for instance, in the New York case that's currently going on against the state of New York, the Thomas More Society is representing a bunch of doctors and nurses who claim that they would sin gravely if they acted in cooperation with the evil of abortion. How would they be doing so? The claim is that all three of the current vaccines either have fetal cells that were obtained by abortions in the vaccine itself, or in the case of Pfizer and Moderna, that those vaccines were tested using fetal cells that had been aborted. And even the connection to the previous testing makes them cooperative with evil in a way that their religion prohibits. I don't want to say anything too categorical, but I believe that when this claim will be very difficult for agencies to successfully claim that that's either insincere or non-religious, even if it is, even if we know that many of those claims are not sincere or are sincere but not religious. This is the most common claim you're going to confront probably, and it's likely that you will have to take as a given the employee's claim. Not always, right? One response that some hospitals have started to give is, well, do you know that Tylenol and Tums and Preparation H, those were all tested using aborted fetal cell lines too. And I expect that employees will then say, well, I didn't know that, but now that you tell me that, I'll stop using those products as well. And then we will turn to what does the government have to do once the employee makes that showing. And here, basically, there is a compelling interest, obviously, in keeping our workforce and the public with which we interact safe from COVID.
So, yeah, there's the DOJ prepared to fight your religious liberty, but apparently right now they don't think that they have a good case, which is great. I think it's interesting, though, they said they doubt so many people have a sincerity with their religious belief, or they said that they might sincerely have the belief, but it may be non-religious. And I guess that really goes back to also that people should just be able to make that decision. Because there are people out there who are not religious who do feel that abortion is a great immoral harm to society, that it is personally evil, because I mean you do have to kill the child, right? So as long as we keep funding these companies and allowing them to keep pushing this sort of research, we're going to keep seeing a continuous evil cycle of people really, really pushing abortion. I started my show earlier today talking about the insanity with the people I have to argue with. I guess I don't have to, but on TikTok about the abortion issue, people are so testy about it, and people are so passionate about it, and they're so passionate about an issue that they don't know much about. And they will dehumanize a child. So many people today called a baby a parasite. I'm like, that's not even scientifically accurate in the least bit. They'll say it's not a life. I'm like, that's not scientific either. But people keep pushing it to justify this idea, this concept in their mind about defending the choice. And I said in another video, because people were complaining about religion and religious liberty and so on, and separation of church and state, and when they say that, they feel like our religion shouldn't be impacting politics at all. But it's not that I want to have religious laws in place. It's just I want people to practice freely. And the things that I feel that are religious that compel me to help people, I'll do that personally. But it's the people on the left who have different moral values that they feel that we have to use the government to enforce those things. For example, when people say that healthcare is a human right, well, it's a commodity, and it's not a guaranteed right in the U.S. Constitution. So you believing that someone else should just have to pay for all those things, it would be nice, but that is a belief that you have. I pointed out that the idea of the choice of the woman to have the abortion, how it just supersedes everything to the point where like you can have like the sacrifice of the child and all, just for whatever the reasons that the woman has, that men aren't supposed to question it, that you're not supposed to question another woman, and so on. And even if you have one and you know it is a gigantic mistake, you still cannot question the authority of the choice that another woman has to make. I had someone in my comments who said they regretted an abortion. They were pro-choice until they had one. And then so many people are like, well, you shouldn't be able to stop people from having one, and you can still be against abortion and then still support someone else's right to do it. What? And I started there's people who were trolling me who was earlier who started commenting to her. At that point in time, I started to block people. Because I'm like, I can take the craziness that you're saying, but a woman is saying that she killed her child and she has regret. That she said a piece of her soul died that day. And people are saying, mind your business. Mind your business. You still can't tell another woman what to do. So that sort of mentality is very cultish and very religious. It is all dogma. It's not science, it's dogma. It's modern day child sacrifice on the altar of self. So these people believe in pushing their religion and their values and their beliefs, but you can't speak up against you can't speak out at all about what you believe. So it's interesting, but these people are convinced so deeply of it because there's been such a huge industry getting them to this point, molding their minds. And a lot of these people who comment are very young people who just don't know any better, don't have any life experiences, and are advocating it so fiercely and probably never had one themselves, but they just believe in this ideology so much because they've been crafted to feel this way. And it's been going on for a very long time. Bernard Nathanson, I think that's the name of the founder of NARAL, who straight up lied about public support surrounding abortion and also lied about the amount of women who were being harmed or killed during back alley abortions. He knew the numbers were way off, but he knew that was a way to gain public support, to lie through his teeth, and he knew the media would back him up on it. Like, people talk about Margaret Sanger. There's some other figures in the abortion industry that were for population control and other things that we need to talk about. So a lot of this stuff is based on lies and propaganda to shift and mold public opinion because they had a goal of population control and they were going to use abortion for it. And now, on top of having this really sinister ideology, and some people still spout it today, like, well, what would happen? There's so many children in foster care. There's so many people in adoption. Like, we're overpopulated. So why are you advocating for killing a baby? If you really feel that way, you can exit anytime you want to. Like, if you were that pressed about it, but you're not. You're not. You're not. That's just a talking point to justify the madness. And people keep pushing it and will keep pushing it because there's a lot of money in selling your baby body parts. And people do it for the science. In the summer, it came out that our government, our FDA that approved these vaccines, by the way, that's about to approve these vaccines for your kids, we're buying fetal tissue for humanized mice experiments, and they needed it to be fresh and never frozen. And I'm not joking. So yeah, there's that. And these companies did use, for the vaccines, they did use fetal tissue in one way or another, whether it was for testing or whether it was direct use or whatever. So if we don't demand that these companies stop using this and try to stop the sales of this, they're going to keep creating a culture where people just keep protecting this industry. They have an invested interest in convincing you to kill your children. And the invested interest is to sell their parts, to sell their remains. So on top of the whole liberty issue with the vaccines, on top of not wanting the government to take too much control and to take over and so on, if we could have enough people actually pushing with the religious exemptions because of what they used to make the vaccine, that would make a pretty big statement. And then we need to keep hashing out these companies that decide to do that. And when our government decides to purchase those things and say enough is enough. So this is beyond this being an actual bodily autonomy issue, this is a whole pro-life movement as well. So, FYI, the DOJ, they are aware of people going to use this religious exemption, and they don't like it. They think that some of you are not sincere. The governor of New York straight up said there are no legitimate reasons. But you keep pushing and you keep fighting, and they're concerned, and you can probably win in court. So keep pressing. Absolutely keep pressing and try to get that religious exemption. And Godspeed to everyone who wants to fight against all this. Last thing I want to do before I do the official closeout, someone did cut together this video that I saw on Twitter, and I just wanted to play it, of Pfizer doing all of these being the sponsors of all these news organizations.
Is brought to you by Pfizer.
CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer.
Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer. Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer.
CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer. Early Start. Brought to you by Pfizer. Friday night on Aaron Burnett Out Front. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer.
This weather report brought to you by Pfizer.
Today's countdown to the royal wedding is brought to you by Pfizer.
And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer.
Meet the Press Data Download brought to you by Pfizer.
This portion of CBS This Morning sponsored by Pfizer.
On how to find the hidden sugars in the American family diet. Sponsored by Pfizer.
Yeah. So FYI, when Project Veritas did an undercover video, the Pfizer people basically saying they're a COVID company now. So there's just a lot of money to be had, I'm sure, all the way around. People are very invested in it. So don't think that it's just a good motto not to trust anyone. I'm sorry. Because people have ulterior motives. And that's just the truth, especially when it comes to government, what you're watching on TV, and etc. And I didn't have time to talk about the Dave Chappell thing, so I guess we will pick that up tomorrow. But Netflix there's some of the head employees that walked out, and they're still very upset about his special. But like I said, we can go back into more of that tomorrow. Please go to blacktnews.com, check out different content that I have on the website. I talked a bit about abortion today, so I want to bring up this shirt that Facebook didn't want me to have an ad for because they said I could shape political opinions, which my reply to that is that's obviously what I want, Facebook. But my money, my business. If people want to start talking about how, they want abortion funded by taxpayer dollars, they want to get rid of the Hyde Amendment and stuff, absolutely everyone of every gender, male and female, should be able to talk about abortion anyway, because it is a huge moral harm to society, but definitely when your taxpayer dollars are involved. But it doesn't have to specifically only be for that, but that is why I made this shirt. So you guys can check that out at blacktnews.com. We do also have seasonal stuff like the pumpkin spice season cups. I got those in red, orange, and black. I did draw the little chibi Trump myself, and I do have shirts of those available as well. And lots of other stuff you guys can check out on the website on blacktnews.com. If you enjoyed the different content that I had here on today, or just in general, please consider supporting blacktnews.com by going to blacktnews.com/donate. I do appreciate everyone who takes the time to like, to share, to subscribe. If you want to go the extra mile, I super appreciate it. God bless you guys, and I will catch you all tomorrow.